Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to our press conference. Warm welcome to you. Today we would like to present to you the preliminary findings and conclusions of the European of Election-Watch.EU's election assessment mission to the European Parliament elections. It is the second time that Election-Watch.EU has conducted an election assessment mission to the European Parliament elections after 2019. So we are actually international election observers which bring good practice home, and we have the democracy of our countries at heart. We have a core team here present, and we are collecting the data from focal points in the 27 member states. And we also have associated 10 civil society organizations all over the European Union. The mission follows recognized methodology by the EU, by OSCE, ODIHR, and references international and regional human rights standards and commitments. This statement outlines where further harmonization is needed to safeguard democratic processes. I am joined here by my colleagues Tatjana Ilscher-Bogusevic and Michael Liedauer. I'm Armin Rabic, and together we will present to you the mission's focus on 6 areas. Those 6 areas are equality, inclusion, transparency, accountability, integrity, and resilience. In this election, democracy was tested on various levels. Acts of violence against politicians in some member states are signs of a growing polarization in the society. There is a fear of a political rift and concerns about foreign interference. In this context, we assessed strengths and weaknesses of the electoral process across the 27 member states. We highlight good practices, and by doing so, we also identify key challenges and show where progress is needed. But let me first talk about equality in participation and representation. Electoral reforms were initiated to increase cohesion of electoral rules. The reform still remains to be completed and implemented. Few member states adopted laws to expand suffrage rights, as for example, Belgium and Germany joined Austria and Malta to reduce the voting age to 16 years. So an additional 2 million young voters under the age of 18 were eligible to vote in these elections. In most countries, the age of the right to stand is at 18, but there are also countries like Italy and Greece where the age is still at 25 years. Also ahead of these elections, Belgium reduced the right to stand to 18 years of age. Also ahead of these elections, the European bodies redistributed the seats of the European Parliament elections from 705 to 720. This reduced the disparity in the weight of the vote among the 27 member states. However, there is still need for a permanent method to find criteria, objective criteria, to have a continued practice ahead of every election. So there needs to be a predictability, what kind of method and what kind of parameters are used to find the distribution of seats. There's still an inequality in the implementation of proportional representation systems and differences to obtain a seat in the European Parliament. First, there are different thresholds across the 27 countries. So some countries don't have a threshold, and others have a natural threshold of over 10%. Then you have, second, 9 member states which do not allow for individual candidacy. And third, there are 6 member states who do not have a preferential voting system in place. Now, Cyprus has abolished the compulsory voting, but there are still 4 member states which have compulsory voting in place, and these countries apply disproportionate fines. For example, in Belgium, if somebody is not voting for 4 times, he or she could lose his or her voting rights temporarily. In Greece, somebody could be in prison for 1 year. However, those fines and this is not enforced by the member states. Now, in this election, we had over 18,400 candidates and 490 candidate lists standing in these elections and running for elections. However, the lack in equality and in competing for office remains striking. The candidate registration varies, and the campaign periods range from several months to some few weeks. Also, we, as election experts, we think public funding of political parties is essential to equal the level playing field in elections. But 8 member states prohibit public funding or do not provide for public funding in the European elections. We also observed significant efforts by the European Parliament and other bodies to increase the level of campaign visibility for the European elections. And also the funding of European political parties increased. But despite these efforts, most member states still continue prohibiting to use the name or the logo of European political parties on the ballot. Now let me go into the alternative voting options. So this is, for example, postal voting, mobile voting with mobile ballot boxes, or it can be out-of-country voting, can be internet voting. But this access to alternative modalities still varies greatly. For example, you have 4 member states, which is Czechia, Slovakia, Malta, and Ireland, which do not offer out-of-country voting, meaning citizens have to travel back to their home municipality to vote there if they want to. So overall, disparities in suffrage rights, representation opportunities, campaign finance rules, and voting options remain. So there is need to further harmonize and reduce inequality across member states. And now I would like to hand over to my colleague Tanya to talk about inclusion in elections. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Armin. In my remarks, I will focus on mission's preliminary conclusions as they relate to the aspects of inclusion, integrity, and some elements of transparency of the European elections. Turning to inclusion first, mission has noted, on the one hand, a clearly increased policy focus at the EU level, and on the other hand, a range of special measures, legislated or voluntary, that are in place in many member states that support the participation and representation of underrepresented groups. Gender quotas in 11 member states, unrestricted voting rights of persons with disabilities in 14 member states, outreach efforts that targeted estimated 25 million young voters, and the availability of electoral materials in national minority languages. These are just some of many positive measures that are welcome. At the same time, the focus on inclusion is far from uniform across the Union, and serious gaps do remain. Among the priorities that we see, what is needed are more efforts to increase the inclusion of women and young people on electable positions on candidate lists. The remaining legal and practical participation barriers for persons with disabilities in elections need to continue to be removed. And the procedures for the participation by mobile EU citizens, of whom there were some 11 million eligible to vote in these elections, these procedures need to be further streamlined and simplified. In this respect, and here I turn to integrity, the ability of national election administrations to ensure an efficient process and to ensure integrity of it was assessed overall positively, and trust in them does remain high. Exchanges between election administrations were facilitated through the European Cooperation Network on Elections, which is valued for mutual exchanges and learning and coordination opportunities. Several electoral administrations were also praised by stakeholders in member states for their efficiency and openness, And that includes the provisions for the publication of detailed election results broken down to a polling station level. These provisions exist in most of the member states. This practice is definitely positive. It enhances transparency and public trust in the electoral process. At the same time, in some countries, the lack of access to essential electoral information and figures, and that includes detailed election results, this lack has been noted by the mission. Here I would like to turn to another cornerstone of integrity, and that relates to voter registration. In European elections, it takes place at a member state level in the absence of a single European voter register. Confidence in national voter registration systems also remains high. However, where improvement is needed is in the European data exchange on voters and on candidates on possible multiple entries. Currently, these are different deadlines and cutoff dates, decentralized voter registration systems in several member states, but also the lack of data on dual citizens is what poses particular challenges. Lastly, electoral integrity is also ensured through the mechanisms of legal redress for any irregularities. In European elections, electoral complaints and appeals are mostly a matter for national responsible institutions, so there's election administrations and courts, and there is only limited review avenues that are available at the European level. The mission has noted in this respect that national provisions need to be enhanced in a number of member states, and in order to better guarantee effective and timely redress. This is necessary in particular regarding overly long complaint submission and review deadlines, and this we noted in some countries. These are the limitations on what types of issues challenges could relate to when they are submitted before election day. These issues exist in about half of the member states. And finally, this is the lack of a possibility to appeal to court in 7 countries, to appeal against decisions of national election management bodies or by parliaments in cases when they are involved in the review and approval of final election results. With this, I hand over to Michael.
Thank you very much. Now, we have already said that these were indeed highly competitive elections with a great number of candidates and candidate lists and differing campaign finance, campaign durations and campaign conditions. But these differences also transpire in the area of campaign finance and with a view to transparency and accountability of campaign finance. A detailed reporting framework overseen by the Independent Authority for European Political Parties and European Political Foundations enhances the transparency and oversight of European political parties at the European level. However, their possibility to conduct Europe-wide campaigns is complicated by a variety of national frameworks for campaign finance, and the majority of campaign transactions is taking place by national parties at national level. The laws and regulations vary widely in that regard, from loosely structured rules in Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands to tightly regulated systems in Latvia, Romania, or Slovakia. 10 member states do not have any campaign spending limits or bans on types of expenditure in place, and also requirements to report about incomes and expenditures vary. Public funding for campaigns is not provided in 8 member states. Limited anonymous funding is allowed in 6 member states, and types of foreign funding are permitted in 11, contrary to recent Commission recommendations. Third-party campaigning also remains largely under-regulated across the EU. Positively, Online campaigning is covered by campaign finance regulations in 16 member states, and the new European regulation on the transparency and targeting of political advertising will provide further guidance once fully in effect. The EU has also adopted new legislation to regulate digital service providers and is taking a global leadership role in that regard. The Commission has opened infringement procedures against 6 countries for non-compliance and has also begun investigating social media platforms for violations of the new law. These and other measures have helped to make the European elections more resilient against foreign interference. But resilience is also required from civil society and the media. While the EU generally remains a safe space for free and independent media, there are concerns pertaining to cases of arrests, surveillance, political pressure, and violence against journalists. Civic space, the environment that enables people and groups to participate meaningfully in the political life of their societies, has come under threat during the last 5 years and needs to be further protected, as acknowledged by all major EU institutions. Multiple civic space infringements curtailing the regulatory environment, funding, access to decision makers, and safety of human rights defenders have been reported for a number of member states, with the most concerning trends in Hungary and Slovakia. In this context, non-partisan election observation by citizens is crucial. The European Commission has urged member states to enable both international and citizen election observation, yet only 7 member states have legal frameworks for both. Although voting and counting are public in 11 member states, enhancing public access, systems without adequate accreditation procedures for observers may be misused. We are happy to say that Election-Watch.EU has received accreditation in 12 out of 27 member states and continues advocating to enhance for the conditions for election observation in the future. We aim to publish a final report in September that will contain recommendations and best practices to strengthen European electoral integrity and to enhance democratic practices. We thank you for your attention, and we are now looking forward to receive your questions and will prioritize the questions coming from journalists. Thank you very much, and please introduce yourself as you come forward with a question.
Yeah, Sarah, please. Sarah from Politico.
Thank you, Sarah Wheaton from Politico. A couple of questions. One, you mentioned, and I might have misunderstood, but kind of lack of access to figures and results, and you said that was noted in some countries. Can you elaborate which countries and what the issues were? And then another question, some people have criticized the funding structure of the European Parliament for established political parties as favoring only the established political parties and making it difficult for newcomers to kind of enter the process. What do you think about that? Thank you.
Yeah, I think for the question on results, I hand over to Tanya, and for the question on political party finance to Michael, please.
Coming down straight away. So the first on the data on detailed election results. It is indeed considered to be good electoral practice to provide disaggregated information, really down to the polling station level, and that is done in the majority of the states, in most of the member states, and that happens either online, or detailed results are really posted physically at premises in polling stations or in municipalities. Countries like Slovakia, for instance, also upload detailed or scans of actual result protocols online, and that is very positive because that allows any interested citizens or stakeholders in principle to compare data from polling station to a higher election administration. Countries that do not provide for this at the moment are Italy, Luxembourg, Germany, and Malta. A little caveat for Luxembourg, data is provided, but at the canton level, so a step above. With the remark that I made earlier, I also wanted to make reference to inconsistent availability of data that is easily accessible and easily digestible. It is data on, for instance, candidacy. And that is something that, for instance, prevents analysis on gender composition of candidate lists, analysis of candidate lists from the perspective of inclusion of youth. And some member states are doing better than others in this regard. What we see as a positive step is that the European Commission, in its latest recommendation for these elections, it also called on member states to try and provide such disaggregated data on an electoral process, specifically to facilitate analysis and to be able to devise any assistive measures in a more informed fashion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah, for your question. So now we're talking about public funding and support for political parties. And so, yes, we must acknowledge that once European political parties have been established, then according to their number of seats, there will be funding available for these parties that is not available for parties that have not yet been founded at that level. But there is no free flow of funds from parties at the European level, and the members of which they are comprised at the national level. The European political parties can campaign at European level and according to specific rules in the respective member states, but then the national political parties are carrying the bulk of these campaign requirements. And to which extent public funding is available to these members of the European political parties who provide contributions to the European political parties, that differs from place to place. And countries have different regulations, to which extent parties have already to be established in parliament or have to have so and so many members to be eligible for public funding. The one figure that we mentioned during the earlier presentation concerned public funding where it's not available in the member states, and here I can give you some examples. These are Cyprus, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Hungary, Italy, Malta, and Slovakia. But in the end, we have to see how the future, funding perspectives for all these parties will look like, as they also depend on group composition. And as we currently understand, the groups compositions in the parliament at the moment is subject to change, and we will learn hopefully much more about this during the context of this week. Thanks.
Are there any more questions? Please, also for those who are not journalists, are very welcome to ask questions. Or Sarah, any more questions from your side?
Because I didn't feel like
Please.
maybe I didn't phrase the question well, but I think I'm thinking of parties like Volt that exist kind of at a European level but are not registered with the parliament system, and they argue that the way the funding structure is set up is not fair, and it sort of self-perpetuates.
Yeah, I think Volt is a good example because Volt actively campaigns as a transnational party in a number of member states, and as such it would be subject to campaign finance regulations in the respective member states. Yeah, and they would have tried to stand in more countries than they actually did. Yeah, and they have obtained a certain number of seats which gave access to future funding or so, but they are not by status a European political party. And while they have sat with a particular group in the last term, they are also not member of a European political party. They would have to receive elected members in a required number of member states to actually establish itself as a European political party, as they are foreseen in the treaties and as they are regulated by the Authority for Political Parties and Foundations. And we may also see dynamic on that level. At the moment we have 10 EU PPs, and it's possible that some may be deregistered, and it's possible that some may be newly registered based on the current election results. I hope it made it clearer.
Hello, my name is Sandra Kaduri from Keeping Channels Open. It's a dialogue network, not the media, but sometimes we publish articles. Just sorry, were there any early reports of any major irregularities that could affect results, including fraud, manipulation, or disinformation? And anything you can say about the information environment, the quality of rational debate, use of inflammatory language? What can you say about that?
Any further questions that we take? Yes, please.
Frank Schwalber-Roth. I'm one of the founders of the German Green Party and was the first Green MEP here. Apologies, I was late, but do you have said something in the beginning if there has been improvement for the situation 5 years ago? Because I remember 5 years ago there was a similar press conference here. Mm-hmm. Are there improvements? Yes, yes, major improvement. And are there fields where it's just the opposite, where it became worse? Thank you.
Any further questions? So maybe I start replying. There's one more question. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Akin from VUB, Veggie University here in Brussels. Mm-hmm. So my question is with respect to campaign finance. So in the US, we talk about some foreign intervention in the election and stuff like that. So when the system is not broken, why fixing it? So I'm wondering why here in the European Union and stuff like that and the election, what is the reason for having election watchers just like your organization in the context of interference in election? You know? Thank you.
Okay, let us reply to those questions, and then we take one more round if you would like to have, and you have any more questions. Now, let me reply to you, honourable member of the European Parliament or former European member of the European Parliament, regarding the improvements. So, and here I would like to emphasize that there is a large and a strong improvement, especially when it comes to the regulation of the online space from 2019. So, and here we need to really congratulate the European Union to get its act together and come up with a strong legal framework, including the Digital Services Act, including the Artificial Intelligence Act, including the Digital Market Act, and also the Freedom of the Media Act. There's also anti-SLAPP regulation which will be enforced after the elections. So we see that the European Union has really focused on regulating the online space and also the campaign environment online and offline with the transparency and targeting of political advertising regulation. So in this sense, yes, there has been a lot happening, but only partly it was enforced for this election, and most of it will be enforced after this election. And here the European Union really takes the lead globally, because such a regulation was not possible at the UN level, which would be ideal, but there are certain constraints in the United Nations that some parts are more laissez-faire and others are more authoritarian regimes oriented. Now, when it comes to your questions from keeping channels open, we are an election assessment mission. So we are different than an election observation mission. So we use also methodology which is used by the European Union or the OSCE or DIR when it goes to other countries to observe. So the election assessment mission looks at the electoral cycle as a whole, and we try to assess where are there weaknesses and where there are strengths and where there are gaps where we can improve further. Yeah, meaning we have not done any detailed monitoring of the online space or whether there is inflammatory language. And we rather interested whether those regulatory framework in place or the self-regulatory mechanism for online platforms under the declaration under the Code of Practice Against Disinformation, whether that works in practice or there is need for further amendments down the line. and down the road. And we know that the code of practice will become a code of conduct under the Digital Services Act. So yes, in this sense, we are following that very closely, and we try to see whether this, this arrangement with fact checkers and trusted flaggers works in practice, and there are also digital service coordinators in place, and whether they are able to do the job with the current legal framework. And coming back to the last question, maybe I answer it because it was a very broad question on why to fix something which is not broken. We're not trying to, our effort is to make it better, to make it work better. And we have seen a lot of elections internationally. We have observed elections, but at one stage, 11 years ago, we came back to our own country in Austria and realized, okay, there's things which need to be fixed, and we need to strengthen democratic processes. So in this sense, yes, we always can do better, and we need to try to do better in the future. So as the society changes, also the electoral systems need to change, and the way participation in democracy changes. So we try to contribute with our knowledge and with our experience to make the electoral processes within the European Union and its member states better. And we stand ready to support electoral reform process in the future. I don't know whether you want to add. Okay. So please, Sarah, another question. Yeah, please.
Yeah, just to follow up more precisely on the other question, is there anything that we have learned from just the past 4 days of the actual election, or when, I mean, I take your point of the difference between an assessment and observation, but was there observation taking place? When will we hear the result, not only about maybe things that happened to voters on the ground, but also many news organizations and political parties were hacked. There was a Russian-linked group that explicitly claimed responsibility for that in the Netherlands. When will we know, when will we have a sense of how widespread that was?
I just counted 42 people here in the room who are listening. It's good for a press conference, but it's bad because there are much more people who should know about it. Certainly what you've said will be on your website, a press release. But you said your objective is to make it better. Therefore, my question, and I heard what Tanya said. I said, shit. I thought it's all good, and you pointed so many weak points. And in the moment, it's a window of opportunity. The parliament elections have gone. Now other things are on the agenda, and it's a window of opportunities for what? For an interinstitutional working group, you and other civil society actors, council, member states, commission and parliament on election in 5 years. Because, Tanya, you would get a lot of gray hair when you see in 5 years that a lot of your criticism has not reached the necessary decision makers in the member states, commission and parliament. And therefore my question is, do you are thinking already about such an interinstitutional working group to positively nail them and to give them a chance to make it better in 5 years? Thank you.
Any last question from anyone? Ken and Marilyn, please.
My name's Ken Godfrey. I'm the Director of European Partnership for Democracy. I appreciate very much what you were saying, Armin, about the improvements. And I think that there are questions about the fact that many of these policies are not in force. So they've been agreed, but they're not actually enforced. So they didn't make too much of a difference here. So I wondered if you could compare to your pre-assessment mission earlier this year and now, what are the things that most surprised you or most sort of stood out in terms of the change, positive and negative, from 2019? And particularly maybe on the negative side. So Michael mentioned both Hungary and Slovakia as particularly troubling. I don't think intuitively that would surprise too many people here, but it's still a noteworthy thing, I think, a noteworthy observation for everybody to kind of take home with them.
Thank you. And Marilyn, even from IDEA, please.
Thank you very much. Indeed, Marilyn Niven, I'm head of EU liaison of International IDEA. We already had the chance to talk and discuss the code of conduct that we conducted in collaboration with the 10 European political parties and the European Commission ahead of these elections. And my question would be, because we have seen certain media reporting about it, referring to it, as it serves as a checklist for the integrity of online campaigns in particular, although it covers both sides. And the question would be, in the many conversations that you have been having over the past days, was it a topic? Did it come up? And what would be your estimation of the use of codes of conduct as a voluntary tool in the framework of campaigns? And notably, because of course there have been these European elections, but there will be many national elections in the coming years as well. And would you advise in framework of other elections to also look at these tools?
Great, thank you. So I will take the first response of answers and then ask my colleague Tanya to take over, and then Michael to talk about the code of conduct question, and then we conclude. Now, coming to your question, Sarah, what have you learned in the last 4 days about the elections? And probably for us it's too early to make a final assessment, and we refer to our final report, which we published in September, with our key findings, references, and also recommendations for the future, where we also try to focus on advocacy with the different institutions, whether it's the European Parliament, whether it's the Commission, whether it's the Council of the European Union and the Member States. Yeah, so we also see ourselves very much in this advocacy role. So this is only a step towards that, which is much more important. Yeah, if I may say, maybe what we learned in the last 4 days is that it was rather calm, and it seems that the system in place worked. Yeah, but as said, we don't know everything yet. We will follow up and see whether there were any cybersecurity breaches, whether there were any websites of election management bodies down. We have not heard so, but it seems that the systems which were put in place to protect the electoral integrity in the member states worked. We have not heard anything else than that, but if you have any information to that, please let us know. Then I would just briefly reply to you, Ken. Where do we see the scope for further improvement? And here, I think the way we go about it, we try to point out good practices within the European Union member states, because we know it's there. We just have to point it out, and we probably see that leading by example and pointing out examples might encourage change more than criticizing and coming up with recommendation, you should do this or you should do that. Yeah, and there are excellent examples of transparency in campaign finance. There are excellent examples when it comes to suffrage rights and inclusion of persons with disabilities. We all have it there. And if we see from what changed from 2019 elections to now, probably there's much more engagement of the civil society in the elections. There's probably more interest, as we see also here. And there's probably more engagement to protect our democracy and to strengthen resilience in the electoral processes. But let me hand over to Tanya now, and then to Michael.
No, I think my response would indeed build very much on what you started saying, Armin, and in terms of where to go from here and how much gray hair do we all collectively have to develop before something changes. I think it is quite important to acknowledge that there are several very important reforms pending, and they have been pending for a long time. Some of them are fresher, some of them are older, but there is a council decision from 2018 that remains unsigned by one of the member states, so keeping that process somewhat stalled. There is a newer proposal from the European Parliament from the end of 2022 that is more ambitious in terms of how much reform it would like to bring about in the electoral field. There is a directive on mobile EU citizen participation, on funding of European political parties and foundations. There's quite a lot that has been done that needs to continue passing through various institutions within the European Union to make progress there. So that is indeed the role that we see for ourselves for the years to come, indeed, to try and address these issues with different institutions, be it the Parliament, be it the Council, be those member states individually, to try and bring improvements for the next cycle.
Yeah, sure, but I've learned when I was in charge of Greenpeace that there are wonderful moments and less wonderful moments. And I think in the moment, Council, Parliament, Commission would be flabbergasted positively to sit together with you and get your criticism, your ideas, your best practice. And I think you have to take now the lead to push these three and to put it in front of them what you have researched.
Thank you.
Now.
Take that
Well,
message.
thank you very much for the encouragement. We indeed have had a number of very interesting meetings and institutional engagements here in Brussels and through colleagues in the member states, and we plan on having more of those after the dust has settled and when the final report is out with recommendations and we can actually speak to the newly configured institutions in that regard with recommendations for electoral reforms and advocate for that from here. So thank you very much for that. Just to respond to Marilyn's question regarding the code of conduct and put it in context of a few other elements that came from the remaining questions. Now, yes, I think Ken had asked what had changed between the pre-elections assessment mission and now. And I think the key developments are really those legislative developments that have come to a close by the end of the term. In late November, December, it was not clear whether that would happen at all or when it would happen. It was still a very dynamic situation. And although not many of the new rules and regulatory measures really apply to this election yet, they will take force soon after. So maybe not at this event, but as a watershed, I think many things have been achieved, and it will require all of our attention from here into the next term on how things will continue to be debated, how things will be implemented, and how we can monitor all that. And from a monitoring perspective, indeed, in this election assessment exercise, we have not monitored in detail what happened in polling stations over the last couple of days. But we have been observing developments in the member states with our colleagues for weeks and months, and we have seen developments here. And against this background, we can see that citizen resilience through citizen election observers has become more tangible in this term. The emergence of new citizen election observation initiatives in Poland, for example, during the last national election was important to actually contribute to the democratic process in that country. Yesterday, the most observed election was that in Bulgaria. We had a number of not only international but also national election observers in place, with over 700 accredited election observers in Bulgaria yesterday. Now, admittedly, that takes place in a context where there is a national election going on concurrently, but it shows the great interest and the necessity for this to happen, to provide independent oversight. And here we are coming to the codes of conduct. I mean, this electoral process has shown good new developments. It has also shown new dimensions of a political discourse that we did not know before. We had mentioned in the introductory statements levels of political violence. Germany stands out with many good practices, for example, in the area of youth engagement. Unfortunately, we also heard most about political violence at the local level in that country, and that concerned both political, hemispheres, both sides of the spectrum. And we must take these things very serious, and we hope that civil society engagements like ours can contribute to that. The Code of Conduct for Political Parties, which was in place following also the encouragement of Commissioner Jourova, came up in our conversations with the European political parties a number of times. It was seen, Marilyn, that it was a relevant, important tool that is good to have in place, and if possible should have been there a bit earlier to provide a more tangible frame of reference for the political forces involved. It maybe came a little bit late in the campaign, in particular also that it concerned primarily the European political parties. Yeah? But it was hardly employed to also bring the national level political parties and the campaigns under these premises, so to speak. Although it could have been done, and we know of one political party that actually tried to use it as a frame of reference in that regard, but most national parties did not know about it. And I think from that perspective, we can think about that also from here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to everyone, also to our viewers online via live stream. Our preliminary statement is on our website. It has been also put on our LinkedIn page, and there are also hard copies at the entrance for you. We wish you a pleasant afternoon, and if you have any further questions, we are available and we are here. Thank you.